Come on and sit a spell. Watch this old river roll on by. They say a river like this, it washes everything clean eventually. But some stains go deeper than the mud. They go right down to the soul. The story I'm about to tell you is about a man who was stained. A man they called the Raven, who was as fast and as dark as a midnight shadow. He was a bad man, no doubt about it. But the West has a funny way of giving a man a second chance, usually right before it tries to kill him for the first time. It's a tale about a man who rode out of a prison cell and into a whole different kind of prison, and his long, bloody ride to try and find the key. Alright, the sun's getting low, and the ghosts are starting to walk. Let's head downriver to a town called Silver Run, and see if a man can truly wash away the sins of his past, or if he's just bound to drown in him. The man who stepped off the train in the dusty, sun-scorched town of Silver Run was a ghost bleached by 7 years of relentless, institutional sun. He was no longer Jake Raven McCall, the infamous outlaw whose name was a whispered legend of speed and shadow. That man had died in the fiery, twisted wreckage of a failed train robbery and had been buried in the suffocating silence of the Yuma Territorial Prison. The man who emerged from the train's dusty passenger car was just Jake, a man hollowed out by regret, his skin pale from the lack of sun, his movements stiff and uncertain, like a man learning to walk again after a long illness. He was 35, but the 7 years in Yuma had carved 2 decades onto his face. His dark hair was shot through with premature gray, and his eyes, once the color of a stormy sky and filled with a reckless, defiant fire, were now muted, guarded, haunted by the ghosts of his own making. The only remnant of the Raven was the cold, dangerous stillness that still resided in his frame, the muscle memory of a predator, now caged by a profound and soul-deep weariness. He had come to Silver Run not to start a new life, but to end an old one. This was the town he and his best friend, Sam, had planned to retire to. It was their one last job town, the place where they were going to take their shares from the train robbery, buy a small ranch, and disappear into the respectable anonymity of a quiet life. It had been their shared dream, a beacon of hope in a dark and violent world. But the dream had died with Sam, in a hail of Pinkerton bullets, and Jake's share had been 7 years of hard labor under the Arizona sun. He had come back to Silver Run to stand by the river, to say a final goodbye to the ghost of his friend and the ghost of the man he might have been, and then to simply disappear. As he walked from the small train depot into the town proper, a sense of deep and settling wrongness washed over him. This was not the quiet, sleepy, independent town he remembered from his scouting visit all those years ago. A hard, brittle tension hung in the air. The townspeople he passed on the street moved with their eyes downcast, their shoulders hunched. And there were the men. They stood on street corners, lounged on the saloon porch, their faces hard, their eyes cold and watchful. They wore identical gun belts and carried new Winchester rifles with a professional's easy familiarity. They were not cowboys or miners. They were soldiers, mercenaries, an occupying army. His path took him past the sheriff's office. A man in a crisp, military-style uniform stood out front, a man whose face was a mask of cold, arrogant authority. Pinned to the wall next to the door was a series of new town ordinances, pink barely dry. A curfew, a tax on all commercial goods, a prohibition on public gatherings of more than 3 people. And a final, chilling notice, all firearms were to be surrendered to the township security force for safekeeping. Silver Run was not just a town under new management. It was a town in a cage. He made his way to the small boarding house, the one place he remembered from his previous visit. The woman who ran it, a kindly widow named Mrs. Gable, looked at him, her eyes widening for a moment in a flicker of recognition, which was quickly replaced by a look of profound fear. "We don't have any rooms," she said, her voice a strained whisper, her eyes darting nervously toward the street. "I remember you, Mrs. Gable," Jake said, his own voice a rusty and used thing. "You gave me and my friend a piece of your apple pie. Said it was the best in the territory." The mention of this small, human kindness seemed to break through her fear. Tears welled in her eyes. "That was a different time, son," she said, her voice cracking. "A different town. It's not safe for strangers here, especially not for men like you." She knew who he was, or who he had been. It was from her in the hushed, terrified whispers of her kitchen that he learned the story of the town's fall. A year after his Aunt Sam's failed robbery, a man named Marcus Caldwell, a wealthy and powerful official from the territorial government, had arrived. He had come with a deed, claiming the original town charter was invalid and that the land and its rich, newly discovered silver veins belonged to a corporation he represented. When the town had resisted, the mercenaries had arrived. They were Caldwell's Township Security Force, a private army he had hired to enforce his claim. They had crushed the town's small resistance, had broken the will of its people, and were now systematically bleeding it dry, their authority absolute. "They've taken everything, son, Mrs. Gable wept. Our minds, our businesses, our hope." Jake's plan to have a quiet moment of reflection and then disappear was evaporating in the face of this ugly reality. This was not the sanctuary he had dreamed of. It was a place that mirrored the very prison he had just left. But it was not his fight. He was done with fights. He had paid his debt to society. He owed the world nothing. He was about to leave when he asked the one question he had been holding in his heart, the one last ghost he had to confront. "There was a girl here," he said, his voice hesitant. Her name was Leela. She worked at the telegraph office. Long dark hair, eyes the color of a summer storm. Leela. The other reason he had chosen Silver Run. She was a dream he had barely allowed himself to have, a brief, intense connection in a life of transient violence. He had promised her he would be back, a different man. A promise he had spectacularly failed to keep. Mrs. Gable's face went pale. "You shouldn't say that name out loud," she hissed, grabbing his arm. She was the one who led the resistance. She tried to fight him. A brave, foolish girl. Caldwell's men. They're hunting her. There's a bounty on her head. They say she's a terrorist, an outlaw. The world seemed to tilt and then slam back into place with a sickening, final thud. Leela. The one good, clean thing in his past, the woman who represented the life he could have had, was now an outlaw, a fugitive, being hunted by the very same kind of men he used to be. He walked out of the boarding house and into the oppressive heat of the street. His simple, selfish plan to bury his past was dead. The past was not dead. It was alive, and it was being hunted. He looked at the mercenaries, at their arrogant, cruel faces. He looked at the townspeople, at their beaten, hopeless expressions. He had come to this town to find freedom from his own chains, but he had walked into a town that was bound by them. He stood in the center of the street, a man at a crossroads. He could turn around, get back on a train, and disappear, leaving this town and the ghost of the woman he had loved to their fate. He could be the ghost the world thought he was. Or he could be Jake McCall again. Not the Raven, but the man who had made a promise to a girl with storm-colored eyes. He looked down at his hands that had brought him nothing but grief and prison. And for the first time in 7 long, empty years, he made a choice. He would not run. He would fight. Not for money, not for a reputation, but for a memory, and for the slim, desperate chance of a redemption he knew he didn't deserve. The architect of Silver Run's slow strangulation was a man who did not look like a tyrant. Marcus Caldwell was not a sneering, black-clad villain. He was a man of impeccable taste, quiet authority, and a deeply ingrained belief in the righteousness of his own ambition. He was a creature of the New West, a man who understood that true, lasting power came not from the barrel of a gun, but from the stroke of a pen on a legal document, backed by the threat of the gun. His office, on the 2nd floor of the newly constructed town hall, was a testament to his philosophy. It was a space of Eastern sophistication transplanted into the rugged wilderness. It had a thick Persian rug, shelves of leather-bound law books, and a large, polished mahogany desk. From his window, he had a commanding view of the river and the town he now considered his personal property. He was a man in his 50s, with a well-trimmed gray beard, a full head of silver hair, and the clear, intelligent eyes of a master chess player. He saw the world not as a place of people, but as a board of assets and liabilities. The town of Silver Run was his greatest asset. The invalid town charter he had produced was a masterful forgery, backed by a corrupt judge in the territorial capital. The silver veins in the surrounding hills were richer than anyone had imagined. But his ambition went far beyond a simple mining operation. He envisioned a new kind of empire, a corporate state where the law was a tool of the board of directors, and the people were simply a workforce, a resource to be managed and exploited. The mercenaries, led by a ruthless ex-army major named Croft, were his township security force, a board of directors army, there to ensure a stable and profitable environment for his investors. Leela was his primary liability. He had underestimated her. He had expected the young telegraph operator to be cowed into submission like the rest of the town. Instead, she had proven to be a surprisingly resilient and charismatic leader. She had used her position at the telegraph office to try and get word out to the federal marshals, a desperate act that had forced him to seize the office and declare her an outlaw. She had then organized the first, and only, act of armed resistance against him, a poorly planned but courageous uprising of local ranchers that his mercenaries had brutally and efficiently crushed. Since then, she had become a ghost, a symbol of defiance, leading a small, desperate band of rebels who were a constant, irritating thorn in his side. He was in his office, reviewing an ASSI report, when Major Croft was shown in. Croft was Caldwell's opposite, a blunt instrument to his scalpel. He was a big, brutish man, his face a roadmap of old battle scars, his only philosophy the application of overwhelming force. "The prisoner is becoming a problem," Croft grunted, without preamble. "My men are getting spooked. The whispers about the Raven's ghost. It's bad for morale." Caldwell looked up from his report, a flicker of annoyance in his calm, intelligent eyes. He was referring to Sam, Jake's best friend and partner, the one man from the train robbery who had been captured alive. The Pinkertons, eager to close the case, had been persuaded by a significant donation from Caldwell's corporation to transfer the prisoner not to a federal facility, but to his custody in Silver Run. Sam was a piece of leverage, a ghost Caldwell had kept locked in a cage in his cellar, a tool he had intended to use to find the rest of the stolen payroll, which had never been recovered. "And now," Croft continued, "we have another ghost. The real one. Jack Malone is in town." Caldwell's composure did not break, but a new, cold light entered his eyes. "I am aware," he said calmly. "Our men are watching him." He had known of Jake's release from Yuma for weeks. He had, in fact, arranged for it to be expedited. He believed Jake, broken by 7 years in prison, would be a tool then he could use to either lure Lil out of hiding or to find the rest of the train robbery money. The arrival of the legendary Raven had been a calculated part of his plan. "He's a killer," Croft said, a hint of professional respect in his voice. "He's dangerous. We should just eliminate him." "No," Caldwell replied, a thin, cruel smile touching his lips. "Mr. Malone is not a problem. He is an opportunity. He is a piece on the board I have been waiting for. He thinks he has come here seeking his past. In truth, he has come here to serve my future." He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the town below. "Our lovely rebel leader, Leela, has a well-known weakness. She has a deep and abiding affection for the memory of the great Jack Raven McCall. And our new rival is a man with no purpose, no allegiances. A man haunted by guilt. Such men are malleable. They are looking for a cause, for a chance at redemption." "You're going to try and turn him?" Croft asked, incredulous. "I'm going to offer him a choice," Caldwell corrected him. "He can join us, help us bring in the woman he once loved and the man he once called a friend, and in return, I will give him a full pardon, a share of the silver, and new life. I will give him the one thing a man like him craves, a clean slate." He turned from the window, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the intellectual game. "Or, he can choose to stand against us. And if he does, we will crush him. And we will make his beloved Leela watch. Either way, the Raven will serve my purpose. He will either be my hunter, or he will be my bait." Croft, a man who understood only blunt force, was skeptical. "He's an outlaw. You can't trust him." "Of course you can," Caldwell said with a condescending smile. "But you can understand his motivations. And the most powerful motivation in the world, Major, stronger than greed, stronger even than fear, is the desperate, foolish hope for redemption. The architect of chains had just laid his most intricate and dangerous trap. He would not try to break Jake McCall with force. He would try to bind him with the one chain he had never been able to shed, the chain of his own past, and the ghost of the man he had once hoped to be. Jake's first 24 hours in Silver Run were a descent into a waking nightmare. He was a ghost in a town of ghosts, a place where hope had been systematically extinguished. He knew he needed to find Leela, but in a town under martial law, a direct search would be a suicide mission. He needed to be smarter. He needed to become the Raven again, not the gunslinger, but the Phantom, the gatherer of secrets. His quiet reconnaissance, his patient listening in the darkest corners of the town's cantinas, led him to a chilling discovery. The stories he heard were not just of oppression, but of a specific, brutal efficiency. He heard whispers of a place known as the Cellar, a makeshift prison in the basement of Caldwell's hotel, a place where those who defied the new regime were taken and disappeared. And he heard another name, a ghost from his own past, spoken with a mixture of fear and pity, the name of Sam, his partner, the man he had seen die on the floor of the mail car 7 years ago. The idea was insane. Sam was dead. He had seen it. But the whispers were persistent. They spoke of a crazy man in the cellar, a man who had been there for years, a man who had once been the partner of the infamous Raven. Jake had to know. He sought out the one man who would have the truth, the one man who was a prisoner of his own conscience, Sheriff Henderson. He found him not in the saloon, but in his office, staring at the wall, a bottle of whiskey untouched on his desk. The sheriff, it seemed, was trying to find a different kind of courage. "Sam," Jack said, his voice a low, urgent rasp, dispensing with any pleasantries. "They say he's alive. They say Caldwell has him." Henderson's face, already a mask of defeated resignation, seemed to crumble. He nodded, unable to meet Jake's eyes. "It's true," he whispered. "The Pinkertons. They lied in their report. He wasn't killed. They brought him here. It was part of Caldwell's deal with the railroad. They gave him Sam, and he gave them a share of the future Silver Strike." The betrayal was so profound, so layered, that Jake could barely process it. Not only had he been mourning a man who was still alive, but that man had been suffering in a cage a few hundred yards from the very spot where they had dreamed of building a future. "Why?" Jake asked, his voice thick with a new, raw pain. "The money," Henderson said, his voice cracking. "The rest of the payroll from the train. It was never recovered. Caldwell thought he could break Sam, make him tell where it was hidden. But Sam, he never broke. The ghost of his friend was not a memory. He was a living, breathing testament to a loyalty that Jake himself had failed to show. While Jake had been serving his time, moving on, trying to forget, Sam had been enduring a living hell, protecting their secret, protecting him. Jake knew what he had to do. Finding Leela would have to wait. He had to get Sam out. It was not a choice. It was a debt, a matter of honor, the one currency he had left. He spent the rest of the day planning, his mind a cold, logical machine, the skills of the Raven returning with a grim, practiced ease. He used intelligence from Henderson to map out the hotel's interior, the guard rotations, the location of the cellar. The plan was not one of brute force. It was a ghost's plan, a plan of infiltration and extraction. That night, he moved. He was a shadow, a whisper of wind in the back alleys of Silver Run. He used a series of rooftops to bypass the patrols on the street, his movements fluid and silent. He found his way to the hotel's rear entrance, a delivery door for the kitchen. He dispatched the lone, careless guard with a single, silent, non-lethal blow, a ghost's touch that left the man unconscious, not dead. He made his way to the cellar, a dark, damp, foul-smelling place that was a stark contrast to the opulence of the hotel above. He found the cell, and in it, he found the ghost of his friend. The man who looked back at him through the bars was not the laughing, confident Sam he remembered. This was a creature of the darkness. He was rail-thin, his beard long and matted, his eyes, in the faint light of Jake's lantern, holding the wild, haunted look of an animal that has been caged for too long. But through the madness, through the years of suffering, a flicker of recognition ignited. "Jake!" Sam's voice was a dry, cracked whisper, a sound that had not been used for conversation in years. "I'm here, Sam," Jake said, his own voice thick with a grief and guilt so profound it was a physical pain. "I'm getting you out." He worked on the lock, his tools a set of improvised picks he had fashioned himself. As he worked, a new, horrifying realization dawned on him. He remembered the plan, the one they had made all those years ago. If the robbery went wrong, if they were separated, the money was to be hidden in a specific, secret location. And the location was only to be revealed if one of them could present the other half of a unique two-piece silver dollar they had sawn in half. It was their code, their bond. Sam had been captured. Jake had been sent to Yuma. Neither of them had their half of the coin. The money was still out there, and only Leela, the one other person they had trusted, knew the location of the key. This was why Caldwell was hunting her. It wasn't just about resistance. It was about the gold. The lock clicked open. He helped his friend, who was weak and unsteady, from the cell. They were about to make their way back out when they heard footsteps on the stairs. It was Major Croft, making an unscheduled late-night inspection. The confrontation was sudden and brutal. Croft, a seasoned warrior, reacted instantly, drawing his heavy army pistol. The cellar exploded in a deafening roar of gunfire. Jake shoved Sam behind him, returning fire, his old instincts taking over. It was not a duel. It was a close-quarters, life-or-death brawl. Jake was faster. His shot took Croft in the arm, causing him to drop his pistol. But Croft was a bull of a man. He charged, tackling Jake, the two of them crashing to the floor. As they grappled in the darkness, Sam, the broken ghost, did the last thing anyone would have expected. He saw Croft's fallen pistol. With a wild, desperate cry, he scrambled for it. He raised it, his hands shaking, and fired, the shot going wide but forcing Croft to break off his attack on Jake. In that moment of distraction, Jake ended the fight, a single, professional blow rendering the Major unconscious. They had won. They had escaped. But the price was high. The gunshots would have alerted the entire hotel. They stumbled out into the night, Jake practically carrying his friend, the entire town now in a roused hornet's nest. They had the ghost from the cage, but now they were both fugitives, hunted, with nowhere to run. And Jack now knew the terrible, tangled truth. His past was not just a chain, it was a web, and he, Leela, and Sam were all caught in its threads, with the spider, Caldwell, now fully aware that his cage was empty. The escape from the hotel cellar was a desperate, chaotic flight into a hostile darkness. The town of Silver Run, which had been a quiet prison, had erupted into a hunting ground. The sound of alarm bells and shouting men echoed through the streets as Caldwell's mercenaries fanned out, their lanterns cutting sharp, predatory beams through the night. Jake, half carrying the weak and disoriented Sam, knew they couldn't stay in the town. Their only hope was to melt into the wilderness, into the rugged and forgiving landscape of the surrounding canyons. He moved with the grim, practiced efficiency of a man who had spent a lifetime on the run, his old instincts a familiar, bitter taste in his mouth. He found them horses at the livery, a silent, swift theft in the confused darkness. They rode out of town, not on the main trail, but through a series of forgotten arroyos, leaving a confusing, difficult trail for their pursuers. For 2 days, they rode hard, pushing deeper into the wilderness. Sam, his body ravaged by years of malnutrition and abuse, struggled, but a core of his old, stubborn resilience had been reawakened. The feel of a horse under him, the vast, open sky above, was a potent medicine. The madness in his eyes began to recede, replaced by the ghost of the man he had once been. During those 2 days, the full story of Sam's ordeal came out, told in broken, hesitant fragments around a small, smokeless campfire. He spoke of the years of solitary confinement, of the beatings, of Caldwell's relentless, psychological torture, his constant questions about the money, and about Leela. Sam had never broken. He had protected their secret, and he had protected her name, at the cost of his own sanity. The weight of Jake's guilt grew with every word. She tried to get me out, Sam whispered, his voice a dry rasp. A year ago. Her and some of the ranchers. It was a fool's plan. They were slaughtered. That's when Caldwell declared her an outlaw. He put the bounty on her head. It was my fault. No, Jake said, his own voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. It was my fault. All of it. I should have been here. On the 3rd day, as they were making a cold camp in a well-hidden box canyon, their pursuers found them. Not Caldwell's mercenaries, but a different group. They were ragged, hard-faced men and women, emerging from the rocks with a silent, practiced skill, their rifles held at the ready. At their head was a woman with eyes the color of a summer storm, her face thinner and harder than Jake remembered, but her expression a mask of fierce and yielding determination. It was Leela. The reunion was not the tender, cinematic moment Jake might have dreamed of in his prison cell. It was tense, weary, steeped in 7 years of abandonment and betrayal. Leela looked at him, and her eyes held not the warmth of a former lover, but the cold, appraising gaze of a revolutionary leader judging a potential and dangerous asset. "McCall," she said, her voice a low, steady thing, devoid of any of the girlish warmth he remembered. "I heard you were back. I see you've brought a ghost with you." She looked at Sam, and for a moment, a flicker of pain and pity crossed her face. "He's alive," Jake said simply. "So I see," she replied. "Caldwell will be turning this desert upside down looking for you both. You were a fool to come back." "I came back to end this," he said. "This is not your fight anymore, Jake," she said, her voice sharp. "You gave up your right to be a part of this town when you rode away. This is our home. We are the ones who have stayed. We are the ones who have bled for it." Her small band of rebels, a collection of dispossessed ranchers and a few Ute warriors who had been driven from their lands, looked at Jake with open suspicion and hostility. To them, he was not a savior. He was a part of the problem, a legendary outlaw, a man who represented the very violence and chaos they were trying to fight. It was Sam, the broken ghost, who bridged the gap. "He came back for me, Leela," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "And he came back for you. We were fools, all those years ago. We thought a pile of gold could buy us a new life. We were wrong. But he's not the same man. He's not the Raven." Over the next few hours, in the secret, fortified canyon that served as the rebels' hideout, the three ghosts of the past outlaw, the prisoner, and the rebel family laid their cards on the table. They spoke of the train robbery, of the hidden money, and of Caldwell's vast, corrupt conspiracy. Leela, in turn, told them of her long, lonely war, of the small victories and the devastating losses, of her struggle to keep the spirit of resistance alive in a town that was dying of fear. She revealed the final, missing piece of the puzzle. The SE maps that Caldwell was so desperate to find were real. Her father, the town's first telegraph operator, had been one of the original founders, and he had hidden the maps before his death. She knew where they were. But she also knew that if she used them, if she revealed the location of the silver, it would not bring prosperity to the people. It would bring a new, even more vicious, gold rush. A new wave of corporate predators like Caldwell, who would simply finish the job he had started. "This is not just about getting rid of Caldwell," she said, her eyes burning with a fierce, idealistic fire. "It is about building something new. A town that belongs to its people, not to the highest bidder. The silver is a curse. It must remain hidden." Jake looked at this woman, this warrior, and he saw the folly of his own simple quest. He had come back to save her, the damsel in distress, from his memories. But she did not need saving. She was the one who was saving the town. He was the one who was lost. He made a decision. He would not try to lead. He would not try to take over. He would serve. He would offer her the only thing he had left of any value, his gun, and the deadly skills of the man he used to be. "I am not here to lead," he said, his voice quiet, humble. "I am here to fight. For you. For Sam. For this town. Tell me what you need me to do." Leela looked at him for a long, searching moment. She saw the change in him, the quiet, weary sincerity that had replaced the arrogant fire of his youth. She saw not the Raven, but Jake, a man trying to find his way home. She gave a single, curt nod. The outlaw and the rebel had finally, tentatively joined forces. The real war for Silver Run was about to begin. The alliance between Jake's deadly skills and Lila's strategic leadership created a new, and far more dangerous, form of resistance. Their small, ragged band, which had been fighting a defensive, reactive war, now went on the offensive. They were an army of ghosts, their ranks a strange and potent mixture. Jake, the legendary gunfighter; Sam, the man who had been to hell and back, his mind now sharp with a survivor's cunning; Leela, the charismatic, revolutionary heart of the movement, and a collection of dispossessed ranchers and fierce Ute warriors, all united by their shared hatred of Marcus Caldwell. Their strategy was not one of open battle, but of 1,000 small cuts, a guerrilla war designed to cripple Caldwell's operation and expose his weakness to the terrified townspeople. Jake, with his deep, institutional knowledge of how outlaw gangs operate, became their tactician. He knew that an army like Caldwell's mercenaries ran on three things: money, ammunition, and fear. They would systematically take all three away. Their first target was the money. Caldwell was funding his army by bleeding the town's businesses dry. Jake and a small, hand-picked team, moving with a ghost silence, began a series of daring, late-night raids. They did not rob the bank. They intercepted the couriers who carried the protection money from the town to Caldwell's hidden mining operations. They would appear like phantoms on the trail, disarm the couriers, take the money, and vanish into the rocks, leaving the terrified mercenaries unharmed but humiliated. The stolen money was then smuggled back into the town and used by Lila's network of sympathizers, led by the quiet, courageous Mrs. Gable, to buy food and medicine for the struggling townspeople. Their second target was the ammunition. Caldwell's power was based on his superior firepower. Using intelligence from a still cooperative Sheriff Henderson, they learned the schedule of the clandestine supply wagons that brought fresh rifles and cartridges from a corrupt army quartermaster at a distant fort. They did not attack the wagons directly. Instead, they used their knowledge of the terrain to create a series of natural disasters. A sudden rock slide, triggered by a single, well-placed stick of dynamite, would block a key pass. A flash flood, caused by the destruction of a beaver dam upstream, would wash out a trail. The supply wagons were delayed, lost, their precious cargo of violence never reaching its destination. Their third, and most important, target was the fear. Jake knew that Caldwell's greatest weapon was the illusion of his own invincibility. They had to shatter that illusion. They began to fight a war of symbols. They would sneak into town at night and paint a single, black raven on the door of a known collaborator. They would leave a bundle of arrows on the steps of the town hall. These were small, seemingly insignificant acts, but in a town starved for hope, they were electrifying. They were whispers of defiance, signs that the ghost was walking among them, that the tyrant was not all-powerful. The effect of this campaign was profound. Inside Silver Run, the spirit of the people began to change. The quiet, sullen fear was replaced by a new, dangerous sense of hope. Small acts of passive resistance began to pop up. A blacksmith would accidentally lame the horse of a mercenary. A saloon keeper would run out of whiskey when the soldiers came to drink. It was a conspiracy of silence and inconvenience, 1,000 tiny cuts that were beginning to bleed Caldwell's authority dry. Lila was the heart of this internal resistance. She moved through the town in disguise, a shadow in her own home, meeting with her network, organizing the distribution of the stolen funds, nurturing the fragile embers of rebellion. She was the voice, the spirit, the unwavering moral center of their cause. Jake, meanwhile, was the ghost in the wilderness, the hard, lethal edge of their movement. He and Sam, their old partnership reborn in this new, righteous cause, were a devastatingly effective team. Sam, whose mind had been sharpened by years of isolation and observation, had an uncanny ability to predict their enemies' movements, to think like the jailer he had for so long endured. Caldwell was being driven into a state of frothing, paranoid rage. He was a man in a fortress, yet he was under siege from all sides. His money was disappearing. His supplies were dwindling. His men were growing restless and spooked, fighting a phantom army that was everywhere and nowhere. He was losing control, and he knew it. He doubled the patrols, offered a massive new bounty on both Jake's and Lila's heads, and began to rule the town not with a veiled threat, but with open, brutal force. The town became an armed camp, the gilded cage now showing its iron bars. The war for Silver Run was escalating. The army of ghosts had successfully cornered the tyrant, but they all knew that a cornered wolf is the most dangerous beast of all. The slow, methodical war of 1,000 cuts was about to erupt into a final, bloody, winner-take-all confrontation. Marcus Caldwell, stewing in the self-imposed prison of his lavish hotel suite, was a man watching his empire crumble from the inside out. The guerrilla war being waged by Jake and Lila's ghost army was a masterpiece of attrition, and it was devastatingly effective. His flow of money had been choked to a trickle. His mercenaries, their pay now sporadic and their nerves frayed by fighting an enemy they could never see, were on the verge of open mutiny. The townspeople, once a herd of docile, frightened sheep, were now looking at his men with a quiet, contemptuous defiance. The fear he had so carefully cultivated was being replaced by a far more dangerous emotion, hope. Caldwell knew he was losing the war of attrition. He was a creature of the New West, a man who understood capital and influence, not protracted, messy range wars. He had to end this, and he had to end it now. Since his own army was proving unreliable, he decided to purchase a new one. He sent a secret, desperate telegraph to the one man in the territory who was more ruthless, more powerful, and more corrupt than himself, Senator Thaddeus Kane. The senator was the hidden hand behind Caldwell's entire operation, the architect of the grand conspiracy to seize the valley's silver. Caldwell's message was a plea for aid, a request for the senator to use his immense political influence to dispatch the U.S. cavalry to crush this unlawful insurrection under the guise of restoring federal order. But Caldwell also knew he needed to offer the senator something more than just a plea. He needed to offer him the one thing Kane wanted above all else, the lost SE maps. He had to force the rebels' hand, to make them reveal the location of the silver, the key to the entire kingdom. He decided to set a trap, a devil's bargain so cruel and so personal that he believed even the stoic, defiant Leela could not refuse it. His bait was Sam, the ghost from his cellar. Caldwell's men, in a rare successful raid, had managed to recapture one of Lila's young couriers. Under torture, the boy had revealed the location of the rebels' main hideout. Caldwell now knew where his enemies slept. He did not plan a full-scale assault. He planned an execution. He sent a message to the rebel camp, carried by the same young courier, now a pale, trembling messenger of doom. The message was simple and brutal. Caldwell had scheduled a public hanging for Sam in the center of Silver Run to take place in 3 days' time, at high noon. He was to be hanged as an example, a message to all who would defy the town's legal authority. However, the message contained a private addendum for Lila's eyes only. Caldwell would trade Sam's life. He would grant him a full pardon and safe passage out of the territory. The price was the SE maps. All she had to do was bring them to him, alone, at the gallows, 1 hour before the scheduled execution. The message tore through the rebel camp like a poison wind. It was a perfect, diabolical trap. It was designed to shatter their alliance and destroy them, no matter what they chose. If they allowed Sam to hang, their movement would be broken by the shame of their own inaction. Their moral authority, their very reason for fighting, would be gone. The ghost army would dissolve, its spirit crushed. But if Leela agreed to the trade, she would be sacrificing the valley's future to save one man's life. She would be handing the keys to the kingdom to the very men they had been fighting, condemning the entire valley to the corporate servitude of Senator Kane. And, most likely, Caldwell would simply take the maps and kill her anyway. The debate in the rebel camp was agonizing. The ranchers, pragmatic men, argued that Sam was one man, and the valley was everything. They could not sacrifice their future for one life, no matter how heroic. The Ute warriors, led by Black Eagle, were more conflicted. To them, leaving a warrior behind, even a white one who had fought bravely, was a deep and profound dishonor. The decision fell, as it always did, to Leela and Jake. They retreated to a quiet ledge overlooking the camp, the weight of an impossible choice settling over them. "He's playing us against each other," Leela said, her voice tight with a pain that was deeper than anger. "He knows that Sam is our soul. If we let him die, we become as ruthless as he is. And if you give him the maps, we lose everything we've fought for," Jake countered, his own face a grim, tortured mask. He looked at Leela, and in her storm-colored eyes, he saw the unbearable weight of leadership. "This is my fault," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "Sam is in that cage because of me. The train robbery, the money, it all started with me. This is my debt to pay, not yours." In that moment, a new, desperate plan was born, a plan even more audacious and dangerous than any they had yet conceived. They would not accept Caldwell's bargain. They would change the terms. They would not trade the maps for Sam's life. They would take Sam back. "He expects us to try and rescue him," Jake said, his mind, the mind of the Raven, now working with a cold, clear, deadly focus. "He will turn the entire town into a fortress. The hanging is a trap, designed to lure us into an open street, into a killing field. So, we don't go into the town," Leela said, her own strategic mind catching the spark of his idea. "No," Jake replied, a slow, cold smile touching his lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "We bring the town to us. Caldwell thinks his power is in the buildings and the guns of his men. But his real power is in the lie that he is the legitimate authority. We are going to take that away from him. We are not just going to save Sam. We are going to put Marcus Caldwell on trial, in front of the entire world. The plan was insane. It was a gamble against impossible odds. It would require perfect timing, unwavering courage, and a level of deception that bordered on theatrical genius. It was a plan that could only have been born from the desperate, brilliant minds of a legendary outlaw and a fiery rebel. They would not just save the prisoner, they would liberate the entire prison. The day of Sam's scheduled execution dawned with a suffocating, ominous stillness. The sky was a pale, washed-out gray, and the air was thick and heavy. Marcus Caldwell had transformed Silver Run into a military fortress. His mercenaries were everywhere, their rifles glinting on the rooftops, their positions fortified behind barricades of sandbags and overturned wagons. The newly constructed gallows in the center of the main street was a stark, ugly centerpiece in his theater of fear. He was a king in his castle, waiting for the final, satisfying act of his victory. The townspeople had been ordered to assemble in the plaza to witness the execution, a mandatory lesson in the consequences of rebellion. They gathered, a silent, gray mass of humanity, their faces blank with a mixture of terror and a deep, shamed resignation. But Jake and Lila's army of ghosts was not preparing for an assault. They were preparing for a performance. The night before, under the cover of darkness, they had undertaken a series of quiet, audacious missions. A small team of Ute warriors had silently, expertly, cut the telegraph lines, severing Caldwell's connection to the outside world. Another team, led by Jake himself, had infiltrated the town's livery stable, not to steal horses, but to place a series of small, precisely located smoke bombs. As the town clock began to strike the 11th hour, 1 hour before the hanging, Lila appeared. She did not come as a desperate rebel, but as a woman on her way to a negotiation. She rode into town alone, under a white flag, her face a mask of calm, tragic resolve. She held a leather satchel in her hand, the decoy maps. She was the picture of a defeated leader, come to make the terrible trade. She was met at the edge of the plaza by Major Croft and a contingent of mercenaries. The maps, Croft grunted, his eyes gleaming with greedy triumph. First, I see that Sam is alive and unharmed, Leela replied, her voice steady. Sam was brought out, his hands bound, his face pale but his eyes burning with a defiant fire. He and Leela exchanged a single, powerful look of unspoken understanding. As Leela was about to hand over the satchel, the first phase of Jake's plan erupted. The smoke bombs in the livery stable, and into other abandoned buildings at either end of town, were ignited by a slow-burning fuse. Thick, billowing clouds of black smoke began to pour into the sky, creating the terrifying illusion that the entire town was on fire, that the rebels had launched a massive, suicidal, scorched earth attack. In the first moments of confusion, as Croft's men spun around, trying to locate the source of the attack, Jake and his fighters made their move. They were not an army charging down the main street. They were a flood, emerging from every alley, every doorway, from the very fabric of the town itself. They had infiltrated the town the night before, hiding in cellars and attics, becoming a part of the populace. They did not engage the main body of mercenaries in the plaza. Their targets were strategic. They took the rooftops, their rifles appearing in the windows that had, moments before, been empty. They captured the town's small bell tower, and the church bell began to ring, not in alarm, but in a steady, triumphant peal of liberation. The mercenaries in the plaza were caught in a perfect, disorienting trap. They were surrounded by smoke, by the sound of a ringing bell, and by the sudden, shocking appearance of rifle barrels in every window around them. They were an army on an open field, suddenly finding themselves in a forest of guns. It was in this moment of absolute chaos that the true masterstroke of the plan was revealed. It was not just a military coup, it was a legal one. From the balcony of the sheriff's office, a new figure appeared. It was the circuit judge from the territorial capital, a man known for his fierce independence and his incorruptible nature. He was flanked by Sheriff Henderson, who was no longer a broken man, but a lawman standing tall, his badge gleaming in the smoky light. Sarah, the journalist from the previous story, had worked a miracle. Using the railroad's own telegraph lines before they were cut, she had sent a coded message to the judge, a man she knew from her father's time, outlining the entire conspiracy. backed by a copy of Lieutenant Harris's report. The judge, intrigued and enraged, had agreed to come, arriving in secret the night before. By the authority of the United States Territorial Court, the judge's voice boomed across the plaza, amplified by a speaking trumpet. Marcus Caldwell, you are hereby under arrest for the crimes of murder, conspiracy, and treason against the people of this territory. The effect was devastating. Caldwell's authority, which was based on the lie of his own legality, was instantly, irrevocably shattered. He was no longer the town's ruler, he was a common criminal. His mercenaries, who were being paid to enforce his law, were now an illegal army, facing down the full, legitimate weight of the federal judiciary. Their will to fight evaporated. Some threw down their guns and surrendered on the spot. Others, including Major Croft, tried to fight their way out, only to be cut down or captured by the now overwhelming force of the united townspeople and Jake's militia. The trial of Silver Run was not a battle, it was a reckoning. It was a perfectly executed plan that had used deception, courage, and the power of the law itself to dismantle a tyrant's regime without firing a single shot in the main plaza. Jake, who had been hiding among the townsfolk, used the chaos to free Sam from his stunned captors, the two friends melting back into the crowd. The only person who refused to surrender was Marcus Caldwell. Seeing his empire collapsing around him, seeing the judge on the balcony, he let out a raw, animal scream of pure fury. He fired his pistol not at the judge, but into the crowd of his own cowering men, a final, insane act of a king who would rather destroy his own kingdom than see it fall into the hands of another. Then, he turned and fled, not toward his hotel, but toward the one place left that represented the source of his power and his ultimate ambition, the railroad bridge at the edge of town. His escape route, his monument, and the stage for his final, personal confrontation with the ghost who had brought him down. The great iron railroad bridge that spanned the Colorado River was Marcus Caldwell's monument to his own ambition. It was a stark, black skeleton of industrial power, a symbol of the new West he had intended to build, a bridge that would carry his stolen silver out and his absolute authority in. It was to this monument, this altar of his own greed, that he fled, a king without a kingdom, a man running not just from the law, but from the ruins of his own grand design. Jake McCall followed. He did not run. He walked. He moved through the chaotic, now celebrating streets of Silver Run, a solitary, determined figure amidst the joyful chaos. This was not over. The town had been liberated, the mercenaries had been defeated, but his own personal war, the war that had begun with the death of Sam 7 years ago and had been resurrected by the capture of his sister, was not yet finished. This was a final, personal debt that had to be paid. He found Caldwell in the center of the bridge, a lonely, defiant figure silhouetted against the gray, morning sky. The river rushed 100 feet below, a powerful, indifferent witness. Caldwell was not trying to escape. He was waiting. He had his back to the town, facing the far side of the river, as if he could will his escape into existence. He held a pistol in his hand, his last and only remaining symbol of power. So, the ghost has come for his final haunting, Caldwell said, without turning around, his voice strangely calm, stripped of its earlier, panicked rage. It's over, Caldwell, Jake said, his own voice a low, steady rumble, stopping at the edge of the bridge, 20 paces away. Caldwell finally turned. His immaculate suit was torn and stained, his face was pale with a chilling, almost serene madness. Over, he said with a soft, incredulous laugh. My dear Mr. McCall, it is never over. You see, you think you have won. You have taken my town. You have turned my army against me. You have even stolen my legacy. He gestured around at the bridge. But you do not understand. I am not a man. I am an idea. The idea that this world belongs to the strong, to the men with the vision, and the will to take it. You can kill me, but you cannot kill the idea. There will always be another Caldwell. There will always be another railroad. This is just a temporary setback in the inevitable march of history. I'm not here to debate history, Jake said, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt. I'm here for Sam, and for Leela, and for every person in that town you bled dry. Yes. The romance of the downtrodden, Caldwell sneered, a flash of his old, condescending arrogance returning. You think you're their savior, a common outlaw, a killer. You are no different from me, McCall. We are both predators. The only difference is that I was more successful at it." He raised his pistol. "But it seems my success has come to an end. So be it. But if I am to be erased, I will take the author of my demise with me." The final duel, on a bridge between the wilderness and the civilization Caldwell had tried to conquer, was stark and brutally simple. There were no tricks, no deceptions. Just two men, their opposing philosophies, and the speed of their hands. They drew. In that split second, a lifetime of choices and consequences seemed to flash through Jake's mind. The boy who had dreamed of a quiet life. The outlaw who had embraced the darkness. The prisoner who had paid for his crimes. And the man who had returned to fight for something more than just himself. He was not the Raven anymore. The Raven had been fast because he had been empty, driven by a nihilistic disregard for his own life. Jake was now driven by something else, something heavier, and something stronger. He was driven by the lives of the people he had fought to protect. He was faster. His shot was a single, clean, economical motion. The bullet struck Caldwell squarely in the chest. Caldwell staggered back, a look of profound, almost academic surprise on his face, as if he were a chess master who had just discovered a fatal, unforeseen flaw in his own grand strategy. He looked down at the blossoming red stain on his white shirt, then back up at Jake. "Inevitable," he whispered, a final, ironic commentary on his own philosophy. He fell not backward off the bridge, but forward, onto the hard and yielding steel tracks of his own broken dream. Jake stood, the smoke from his colt curling in the cool morning air. He looked down at the body of his vanquished enemy, the architect of so much pain and suffering. He waited for the feeling of triumph, of release, of vengeance satisfied. But it did not come. He felt only a vast, hollow emptiness. He had killed the monster, but the ghosts of his own past were still there, silent and watchful. He heard footsteps on the bridge behind him. It was Leela and Sam. They stopped a few feet away, their faces a mixture of relief, sorrow, and a deep, unspoken gratitude. "It's over, Jake," Leela said, her voice soft. Jake looked at her, at the woman he had loved, the woman he had abandoned, the woman who had become a leader of nations while he had been rotting in a cell. He looked at Sam, his brother in all but blood, a man who had endured hell for a loyalty he had not returned. He had saved them. But he knew, with a certainty that was as cold and as hard as the steel beneath his feet, that he could never truly be a part of the world they were about to build. He was the Raven. He had come back to save them, but in doing so, he had been forced to embrace the very darkness he had tried to escape. He was a killer. He was a ghost. And ghosts, he knew, did not belong in the daylight. The death of Marcus Caldwell was the final, definitive end to the war for Silver Run. With their leader gone, and their paymaster's vast conspiracy exposed by the federal judge, the last remnants of the mercenary army surrendered without another shot being fired. The town, battered and scarred but unbowed, was finally, truly free. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, a community being reborn from the ashes of its own oppression. The judge, with the full authority of the territorial government, formally nullified Caldwell's fraudulent land claims. He oversaw the formation of a new, legitimate town council, with Leela unanimously elected as its first mayor, her courage and leadership having earned her the unwavering respect of the entire valley. The town was theirs, but it was a poor town, its resources having been stripped bare by Caldwell's regime. The question of the lost Spanish silver, and the maps that led to it, became the central, burning issue of their new future. The silver could be their salvation, the capital they needed to rebuild, to create a prosperous and independent community. But it could also be their damnation, the very lure that would attract a new wave of predators, a new Caldwell, a new railroad. The debate took place in the town hall, a meeting of the entire community. It was a passionate, heartfelt, and deeply divided discussion. The ranchers and merchants, pragmatic and desperate, argued for unearthing the silver. "It's our birthright," one man declared. "We bled for it. We should use it to build a better life for our children." The Ute elders, and a few of the more thoughtful homesteaders, argued for caution. "The yellow metal is a sickness," an old Ute warrior said, his voice a low, resonant rumble. "It drove the white man to our lands. It made a monster of Caldwell. It will poison this valley, just as it has poisoned every other place it has been found. Some treasures are best left buried. Jake and Sam sat at the back of the hall, silent observers. This was not their debate. It was the debate of the town's future, a future they knew they could not be a part of. Sam, his physical health slowly returning, was still a man haunted, his soul scarred by years of isolation. He was quiet, withdrawn, a ghost who found solace only in the vast, empty spaces of the desert. Jake, too, was a man apart. He was a hero, a savior, but he was also a killer, a man with a past that was too dark and too violent to ever be fully integrated into the peaceful, lawful world they were trying to build. He saw the way the children would sometimes stop and stare at him, their eyes a mixture of awe and fear. He was the raven, the dark, necessary angel of their liberation, but an angel of death nonetheless. The debate raged, threatening to fracture the town's fragile new unity. Finally, Leela, in her new role as mayor, stood up. She looked not at the debaters, but at Jake, her eyes full of a deep, sorrowful understanding. She held up the leather satchel containing the SE maps. "This," she said, her voice clear and strong, "is both a treasure and a curse. And the choice is not just about wealth versus poverty. It is about what kind of a people we want to be." She walked to the front of the hall, to the large pot-bellied stove that was used to heat the room in the winter. She opened the stove's iron door, revealing the bed of hot coals within. "We have a chance to build something here that is rare in this world," she said. "A community built not on gold, but on courage. Not on greed, but on mutual respect. A town where a man's worth is not measured by the weight of his purse, but by the strength of his character." And then, before anyone could react, she did the unthinkable. She tossed the leather satchel into the fire. A collective gasp went through the room. The ranchers and merchants jumped to their feet, their faces a mask of shocked disbelief. The satchel caught, the old, dry leather blackening, curling, and then bursting into flame. "No!" one of the merchants screamed. "Yes," Leela replied, her voice ringing with an absolute, unwavering authority, her face illuminated by the flames of the burning treasure. "We will be a town of ranchers and farmers. We will be a town of blacksmiths and merchants. We will be a town of hard work and honest dealings. We will not be a town of gold. We will build our future with our own hands, not with a curse we dig from the earth. The silver will remain where it is, a secret kept by the land. Our treasure will be our freedom. Nothing more." It was a stunning, audacious, and profoundly courageous act. It was the act of a true leader, a leader who was choosing a harder, but more honorable, path for her people. In the stunned silence that followed, a new consensus was born. The grumbling of the merchants was replaced by a slow, dawning sense of respect. They had not just chosen a future, they had chosen an identity. From the back of the room, Jake watched, and for the first time, he felt a genuine, unadulterated sense of hope. Not for himself, but for them. Leela had not just saved the town, she had given it a soul. His work here, he knew, was truly, finally done. The burning of the maps was a cleansing, a final, definitive break with the corrupting influence of the past. It was the founding act of the new Silver Run, a town that had chosen its own, harder path. In the weeks that followed, a new spirit took hold. The community, now united by a shared, hard-won identity, began the arduous but satisfying work of building a future. Jake McCall watched this rebirth from a distance, a ghost at the edge of the celebration. He was a hero, but he was also an anachronism. He was a man of violence in a world that was now desperately striving for peace. He had been the cure for the town's sickness, but his very presence was a reminder of the disease. He knew he could not stay. His last days in Silver Run were a series of quiet goodbyes. He spent a long afternoon with Sam, the two of them sitting by the river, not saying much, the silence between them full of a shared history of pain and an unspoken, unbreakable bond of brotherhood. Sam had decided to stay, not in the town, but in the wilderness. He was going to live as a prospector, a solitary man at peace with the silence of the mountains. He had spent too long in a cage to ever be comfortable with walls again. They clasped hands one last time, a lifetime of friendship and regret passing between them in that single, silent gesture. His goodbye with Leela was the hardest. He found her on the small hill overlooking the town, the place where they had first dreamed of a future together, So long ago. The sun was setting, painting the sky in the heartbreakingly beautiful colors of a new beginning. So, the raven is flying away, she said, her voice soft, not a question, but a statement of sad acceptance. The raven died in a prison cell a long time ago, Leela, he replied, his own voice quiet. The man who is left. He doesn't know where he belongs. But he knows it's not here. You could belong here, Jake, she said, her storm-colored eyes searching his. We could build something. Together. He looked at her, at the strong, brilliant, beautiful woman she had become, and the temptation to stay, to accept the redemption she was offering, was a physical ache in his chest. But he also saw the truth. He saw the way the townspeople still looked at him, with a mixture of gratitude and fear. He saw the way his own hands, so comfortable with the weight of a gun, were clumsy and awkward with the tools of a builder. You are the future of this place, Leela, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could not name. You are the light. I am the shadow that was needed to bring the dawn. But shadows don't belong in the daylight. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, a ghost of a caress. Build something good here. Build something worthy of the price that was paid for it. He turned and walked away before she could see the tears that were blurring his own vision. He rode out of town the next morning, as he had arrived, a solitary rider. He did not look back. He did not have a destination. He was not running from his past anymore. The chains were still there, the memories, the guilt, but they were no longer a prison. They were a part of him, a heavy but familiar weight. He was a man who had ridden out of the darkness of a prison and back into the darkness of his own past. He had fought his demons, both internal and external. He had not found a new life, or a clean slate. Redemption, he now understood, was not a destination you could arrive at. It was a journey, a constant, daily choice to be a better man than you had been the day before. As he rode into the vast, indifferent, and beautiful emptiness of the setting sun, he was no longer Jake Raven McCall, the outlaw. He was not a savior. He was not a hero. He was just Jake, a man who had faced the chains of his past, and in doing so, had finally, and truly, set himself free.